I probably had the best tenure, with Balaji, where we built a lot of value, did a lot of movies from The Dirty Picture to Ragini MMS to Ek Villain, Main Tera Hero.
All those disruptive movies at that time.
Pretty disruptive because that's how Ekta has been, as an individual. And I think Ekta and I really sort of vibed. To be very honest, this is sort of the giants can't work without us, and we can't work without the giants. There are certain creative skill sets, certain organizational skill sets, certain production skill sets that we bring to the table. When I say we, I mean us as an organization and even any other young boutique producer like ourselves. The skill sets we bring to the table are not skill sets which the studios necessarily have. It's when something that we didn't imagine works, then we say, see, but I told you I think this might work, or I told you this would not work, but we really don't know. And anyone who says he or she knows is blatantly lying. We don't know. And I think we're all following our instinct and we're all slaves to the audience. I think the one thing that we've learned especially is don't follow the trend. Because if you follow the trend, more likely that you're not going to be successful in the second or third film that wants to follow the trend.
Hello and welcome to this first Unscripted podcast. It's called Unscripted because there is absolutely no order to it. We ask our guest questions right off the bat and we expect answers, similar answers to come from the guest who can speak as much and without any filters. So here, the first guest which I have here is my dear friend Tanuj Garg, who is managing partner of production company Ellipsis Entertainment. Ellipsis has done some very interesting work both on the streaming side and of course on theatrical. A lot. Anuj has been a CEO of a large company in the entertainment space earlier, in his earlier avatar. So, he's like an expert, as much an expert you can get, and a great time to do this podcast because we've just come up with our first ever most valuable celebrities special issue in partnership with Interbrand. So Tanuj, welcome to Unscripted, and we will keep it unscripted as I know that you speak straight from the heart, and we would expect some similar answers. So starting off right at the outset, you have been a CEO of a large entertainment company in your earlier avatar. You've written several articles on entertainment. You've been an expert. And now of the last few years, you've been a very exciting avatar as an entrepreneur, as a media entrepreneur, an entertainment sector expert and entrepreneur. How has this shift been?
So, I spent the better part of my, career working for multiple corporates. I began my career with Applause, Mr. Kumar Mangalam Birla's company, back in the year 2003, which is actually when Applause had started. And then Ronnie got me into UTV, and then Ronnie moved me to UTV London, and then TV18, which then became Viacom 18 subsequently, poached me and got me to pretty much head up their international business and marketing, where again I was based out of London. And then one fine day, Ekta Kapoor called me and said, would you consider relocating from London to Mumbai? And I said, well, depends for what. So she said, I'd love to have someone like you to head up our movies business. And that was an opportunity I thought that was worth considering because I was all of 31 at that point of time. And, to pretty much head or be the CEO of a public limited company in the movie space was pretty intimidating.
That was Balaji Telefilms.
That was Balaji Telefilms. So I was heading the motion pictures department. It was pretty intimidating at that time, but I'm delighted I took it up. I relocated from London after almost a decade, and it was a journey from Oxford Street to Andheri West. That was quite the journey. And I think I probably had the best tenure, with Balaji, where we built a lot of value, did a lot of movies from The Dirty Picture to Ragini MMS to Ek Villain, Main Tera Hero.
All those disruptive movies at that time.
Pretty disruptive because that's how Ekta has been, as an individual. And I think Ekta and I really sort of vibed. We saw eye to eye. We had similar tastes, similar attitudes, a similar perspective to work. a very common work ethic, and I think I had the best time, working with her, and I think that's a relationship that's truly sort of stood the test of time. We're great friends even today. We're collaborating on a couple of things even today, and then having worked for corporates for about 15 odd years, I thought it was time to move out, turn entrepreneur, and create value for oneself. Which is when I moved out of Balaji after 4.5 years and took a break for a few months and set up Ellipsis with my business partner, Atul Kaspekar.
And how has that sort of journey been so far? What are the key changes from working for somebody and being your own boss in that sense?
Well, it comes with its pros and cons because when you're your own boss, you pretty much have to be a greater multitasker. You can't rely on people because you got to think about costs. You got to think about doing a lot of things yourself. There's a lot of personal accountability. There's, it's pretty much your neck on the line, right? And I think, that I think it was an exceptional journey, but also I was pretty prepared for it, sort of, because my entire career, whether it's been Applause or UTV or TV18 or Balaji, fortunately or unfortunately, I've always joined organizations in their start-off stages. I've never really been in an organization which was absolutely mature and was running for several years, and I could sort of piggyback on the crest of the organization. So I've always been a part of journeys at their inception, at their very beginning, which is really where all the hard work and the blood, sweat, the tears and the broken bones are when you're actually building a business from scratch. So for me, having worked in 3 or 4 companies pretty much from scratch, was a great way to segue into building my own company from scratch. So I think the transformation from being a senior management professional to being an entrepreneur in the movies business was very gratifying. Of course, it comes with its own challenges, but I think now we're a couple of years into it. I think we're extremely delighted with the brand we've built for ourselves. We haven't really played the volume game or the slate game, as people call it. Kare saal mein 5 picture karo, 4 picture karo. We're about 9 films old, and I think each and every one of our 9 films has been distinctive. It's created a brand for itself. Talent wants to work with us repeatedly. Our studio partners and OTT partners have enjoyed the working with us because our films have been under budget, which is a rarity in this business. Very profitable, and our movies have earned accolades. So I think we've pretty much created a pretty unique niche for ourselves, and that's something we'd like to perpetuate, and sort of move on with. Never lose that individuality that we've tried to effortlessly build for ourselves.
Tanuj, you spoke about starting off with Applause,
Right.
which has also done some fabulous stuff of late as well. But now, what I want to ask you is, as a startup in that sense, in the entertainment space, with some of the giants now in the business of producing movies becoming studios, all the big names, many of those big names have now become studios, like you have Geo Studios, you now have Birla Studios, all of that. So how does it, how do you sort of fit into an environment or in a landscape where these giants are also there? What is your niche?
Well, to be very honest, this is sort of the giants can't work without us, and we can't work without the giants. There are certain creative skill sets, certain organizational skill sets, certain production skill sets that we bring to the table. When I say we, I mean us as an organization and even any other young boutique producer like ourselves. The skill sets we bring to the table are not skill sets which the studios necessarily have.
Which are, would you?
I think essentially the ability to incubate projects, to nurture talent, to nurture projects, creative skill sets, to put a script together, to package a film, to get cast, director, budget it effectively, execute the project, execute the production of the project within a certain earmarked number. I think that requires a lot of hard work, a lot of toil, And I always feel in any case, I think a production house and a studio are two distinctive entities. Neither should try to trespass, in the other's territory. We shouldn't try and step on each other's toes because we were inherently and organically built to do different things. A studio's skill set is financial muscle. Their skill set is distribution. Whereas a production house's skill set essentially is creative, production, stitching a project together, developing a baby. So I think when a studio and a production house come together, there's a lot of complementarity. There's a lot of matching of of complementary skills, and I think 2 plus 2 really becomes 5.
So you are working with the studios as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we've pretty much worked with most of the studios that are in the business. We've worked with pretty much all the OTTs, right now, or we are working with them as well. Whether from a commissioning perspective or from a licensing perspective, we've worked with almost everyone there is to work with.
That's very interesting. You spoke about streaming. Again, that's a very crowded space already. We were just discussing this before we began. But however, what I wanted to ask you to start with on the streaming side is when you produce a movie, a boutique studio, I mean, a production house like yours, how do you then take a decision whether it should be a theatrical release or whether it should be going to streaming?
So that's become a pretty tricky question now because there was a time when movies were only made for theatrical, right? And then streaming came in with its own sort of unwritten rules about what is technically OTT and what is technically theatrical. There was no rule book, there was no encyclopedia, there was no manual. It was almost understood in the initial stages of OTT that if you made the big ticket films, the sort of bonanzas, the event films, they were meant for theatrical, and then the sort of more alternative that became the sort of unspoken norm, and then the sort of more alternative, unconventional, edgy, that word edgy suddenly became very fashionable. These sort of films were meant for OTT. At least that was the rule, and that's exactly how OTT started out, with wanting to sort of back talent or back content which otherwise wouldn't go easily into the theatrical domain. But I think with the evolution of time, I guess, even the OTTs would like to believe that, they require mainstream content too. And necessarily, going after the alternative content or the unconventional content or the atypical content presumably hasn't brought them a lot of subscriptions or presumably hasn't brought them a lot of eyeballs, with exceptions, of course. So now, even the OTTs, well, not all of them, but some of them, also attach a lot of emphasis to packaging and casting, which wasn't really the case earlier. So whilst, of course, everyone professes to go after the script and be very content-led, very debatable, I think there's a lot of words and little action sometimes on that front. But having said that, I think the emphasis now is on a lot of packaging as well. So I think that's when you sort of realize that it's not just about the script, contrary to what everyone would like to believe. Yes, the script is important. It is the starting point. It is from where you start climbing the mountain. So it's your base. But I think for a lot of the OTT platforms now, they've realized if they need to get the eyeballs, they need to get people to come and watch it, then they do need to make sure that the film is packaged well enough. So again, it comes down to who's the director, who's the lead actor, who's the lead actress. So those sort of trappings have started sort of seeping into the OTT world as well.
So when you take a decision of commissioning a movie or starting a movie, there is no there's no thought in the beginning itself that this will be, or do you decide?
It is pretty intuitive, if I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I don't think there's any science to it. We all try and put some method to the madness. So it's fairly intuitive. You sort of know what is likely to fly theatrically and what is likely to fly in OTT. So you sort of follow your hunch, you follow your gut. But having said that, every time you think you've got a rule in your rule book, that rule gets busted almost immediately, because suddenly there comes a film in the market which you never imagined would work theatrically and works, and then there comes a big film on OTT which you thought would work, which doesn't work on OTT either, right? So, and then you're suddenly compelled to going back to the drawing board, and rethinking the rules of the game. And then you realize there are no rules, right? I mean, you make your own rules, you break your own rules, and that's how it should be. But having said that, there's still a fair degree of unspoken compartmentalization that exists, about, oh, this is very OTT and this is very theatrical. But truth be told, even what is intended to be theatrical these days is not really working, So, who is to say, what is really theatrical?
But there's also the budget, if you have a big star cast and if you have an ensemble cast which is expensive, huge budgets, typically those tend to go to theatrical.
Yeah. So that, of course, I mean, I think it's pretty common that if you have the big blockbuster sort of movies, with the 80 crore, 100 crore, 200 crore sort of budgets, they would automatically need to go to theatrical first, because how else are they going to make their money back? I mean, OTT is going to get capped at some point. You eventually need to rely on box office footfalls, But, your event films are far and few in number, right? You have like 2 or 3 or 4 of them in a year. What happens to everything else? I think that's really where the challenge is. I mean, everyone, I believe, is pretty much, and I'm going to be honest and say this, I think whilst we all would like to believe that we know the business and we know which way things are headed, I think a lot of people are really taking blind stabs in the dark right now. I think there's a lot of punting, and which is not necessarily bad, because, this is a creative business at the end of the day.
You can never predict.
And you can never predict. It's also meant to be about leaps of faith. It's also meant to be about conviction. And I think that is really like the bed of our business, right? Like the fundamental, the raison d'etre of our business, right? But I think we all profess, we all try to be gurus in sort of stating, oh, I think this is oriented this way and that way. But we only become pundits in hindsight. Eventually, it's when something that we didn't imagine works, then we say, see, but I told you, I think this might work, or, I told you this would not work, but we really don't know. And anyone who says he or she knows is blatantly lying, we don't know. And I think we're all following our instinct, and we're all slaves to the audience, truth be told.
That's true. That's absolutely true. The other point is, talking about ensemble casts and spectacle films. There have been spectacle films which have spectacularly failed.
Of course.
And then there was Dhurandhar.
Yeah.
So Dhurandhar, do you really believe that Dhurandhar has been really a game changer as far as
Oh, absolutely.
movies are concerned?
Oh, absolutely. And I think sort of every other year or every couple of years, you have that one outlier, that one big film that comes and completely changes the rules of the game, right? I mean, back in the day, we had a Rang De Basanti, which I was a part of many years back. I mean, we've had Dawns and we've had RRRs, and, you have these odd event films that sort of come in every 2 or 3 years or 4 years, which sort of outperform, and then you're suddenly left wondering that, hey, what happened? And maybe this is the trend, and maybe this is the trend I need to follow. And then everyone in blind herd mentality, sort of, tries to go down that path, and then it fails. And then it fails, So I think the one thing that we've learned especially is don't follow the trend, because if you follow the trend, more likely that you're not going to be successful in the second or third film that wants to follow the trend, So I think it's always good to be a market leader than a market follower. And I think a lot of people, unfortunately, try and want to be market followers, thinking that, oh, ye 3 picture ne acha kiya hai, so let me sort of be a Me Too as well here. And that doesn't work, So now, because Dhurandhar has worked, everyone suddenly seems to think that, oh, films on espionage and cool gangster films are the norm of the day, heightened action, over-the-top characters, great music, but I mean, who's to say, right? I mean,
even Sholay initially was seen to be, not a success.
Not a success.
And a few days into it, and
it changed the rules.
Absolutely.
So I mean, I think it's I think our industry unfortunately suffers from this disease, of wanting to make trends out of everything. Whether it's the media, whether it's the industry, we love generalizing things. We love forming trends. We love doing trend stories and trend pieces. Oh, this is the new trend, and I absolutely detest any of that, because I know this trend isn't going to last beyond a couple of hours or a couple of days or a couple of weeks, And then 2 weeks later, we're left holding our own, because we're like, okay, we seem like idiots because we thought this trend was here to stay, and this trend has just been busted all of a sudden, So honestly, there are no trends, trends just make for great reading, but there are no trends.
In fact, that's the, I think, pretty much the script you have followed in the productions
Absolutely.
you have actually held in your own company.
We've never
as well.
followed trends.
Yes.
I'm sorry if I sound like I'm bragging, but when we did Neerja, female-led films, were not the order of the day, I mean, Sonam is a fantastic girl, but I mean, our studio partners at that point of time said to us, hey, Sonam's great, she's beautiful, she looks like an air hostess, but could you maybe get ABC? And we're like, no, Sonam is right for the role, right? When we did Tumhari Saloo with Vidya, she was in the back of 3 flops.
Yeah.
You know, we got Manav Kaul pretty much, out of nowhere, right? I mean, he's a great actor. He's been doing Prithvi and a whole bunch of theatre extensively, extremely accomplished, but nobody really knew him in mainstream films, right? When we did Loop Lapeta, we got, this young avant-garde ad filmmaker, Akash Bhatia, to do the remake of Run Lola Run. We got Tahira Kashyap, as her directorial debut in Sharm. So we've always tried to sort of,
Experiment in this.
experiment a bit, and that's not because we consciously want to steer away. I just think that's our DNA, and I just think as filmmakers and as content creators, you have to stand for something unique. You have to stand for something distinctive, and that's what gives you your edge. If you're going to do regular run-of-the-mill stuff, it may perhaps work for your bank balance sometimes, but it's not going to give you the brand. So we've consciously tried to do stuff that we would watch at home. That we inherently believe in, and I think that's pretty much put us in good stead. I think the lineup of films that we have and our past filmography has been pretty, I'd say, gratifying.
I won't talk about the slate, but what's cooking at at Ellipsis right now?
Well, I mean, I think there's a fair degree of stuff. Like I said, we're not in the volume game because we're one of those producers who works on one thing at a time, because I think that's the only way you can control your creative and control your numbers, both of which are equally important. The minute you start making it like a hamburger factory and sort of start delegating things, and you've got 5 films on floor, you can be rest assured that 4 of them are not going to work, because a film needs a producer's personal touch. It needs for a producer and a director to be working hand in hand. And that's what we've consciously tried to do, which is why we do fewer films, right? Because we spend that much more time in sort of, attending to the film. So we've completed a co-production with Twinkle Khanna's company, Mrs. Funnybone Films. And that's a really nice, charming slice of life film called Go Noni Go, which is based on a short story that Twinkle Khanna wrote called Salam Noni Appa. And it's with Dimple Kapadia, Atiya Shetty, and Manav Kaul.
And again, theatrical.
No, that's not theatrical. That's OTT. Then we have a film that we've done for Z5. It's going to premiere later this year. It's called Dalimb. We released the teaser poster a couple of months back, but not much is known yet. We will be announcing the film a little more formally, closer to its release in October. And then there are 2 more projects. There's a political thriller that we're starting with with a mainline actor in October and November this year. And then there's a nice, fun, young romantic drama, with a Gen Z, sort of couple, which we intend to start, in February or March next year. And there's another project with good old Vidya, who's our favorite, and another actress coming together for a thriller. So there's a bunch of stuff that's, sort of cooking. Yeah.
You talked about mainline actor. You steered a little away from all these big stars and stuff, mainline actors. So how do you see this whole mainline actor business?
Well, I think our emphasis sort of has always been to work with good actors, So whether it was a Sonam, whether it was a Taapsee, whether it's a Vidya, whether it's an Imran Hashmi, Divya Datta, Sakshi Tanwar, Dimple Kapadia, I mean, they're all great names, And our emphasis has always sort of been, to cast in a manner that's appropriate for the character, and not to sort of miscast, because every time someone has tried to be dishonest in their casting, the projects have not worked, So I think we've reached a time now where a script cannot chase the actor. An actor needs to chase a script, and and I think that's really where where hunch and gut and conviction come into play, right? I mean, you have to cast correctly for the project, because today's audiences are so exposed, they can sniff a dishonest project. And I think, there are ample examples of dishonest projects that have been released, and I don't think we want to get into names because the list is pretty long. And those films just haven't worked. And you've had the audiences coming out, when you see their vox pop, you realize they're saying, "Arey, wo kya ghatiya acting tha, he was not right for the role, or she was not right for the role," and that's not the sort of stuff we want to hear. So and I think honestly today, what is mainline? We call them mainline because they're mainline from a perception standpoint, but what's important is delivery. I mean, perception is a mirage, right? So we've never believed in this policy of queuing up. You know, of course, if we feel a particular quote unquote mainline actor is great for the part, we'd be very happy and humble to approach him or her. But if we feel they're not interested, or we feel that they're taking too long to get back, we will make sure the project gets made with someone else. You know, so we never want to be in a situation, or we never have been in a situation where we say, oh, we're not making this film
Just
because this actor isn't there. I mean, that's not the way cinema can work. You know, a film needs to get made regardless. A good story needs to be told regardless. You know, actors, directors, everyone else is incidental to the project.
No, I think that's a very, very important point you make, Tanuj, because I think there has been a lot of discussion these days about this big star determined system actually becoming gradually getting broken. I think that's going to happen sooner than later, because ultimately the script is going to determine what really
And
works.
economics.
And economics.
And I think, I mean, what's equally
I think the
important,
biggest producers have started talking about it.
absolutely, because
You know?
I mean, today there have been so many films with big stars, but they haven't worked because of pure economics. Because I mean, if your script isn't going to make business sense, or your film isn't going to make business sense at the very outset on paper, why are you making the film? And that's a question very often I ask a lot of friendly producers. So what were you thinking, you know, when you sort of put this together? They say, oh, you know, well, you know, there was nothing else happening, you know, and you know, we just thought that, where are the actors? I said, you mean, where are the stars? Stars are limited, actors are many, right? So I think that
And I think some of the big stars are also yearning to do better work in terms of some of the,
selectively,
yeah, selectively.
you know, not all.
Yeah, yeah,
Not
some
all
of
of
them.
them.
That's
Yeah,
why I said
yeah,
some,
yeah.
not all, but some are very talented, and some want
Absolutely,
to also,
yes.
push the envelope and
Yeah.
do something different.
I have a lot of respect for actors, you know, like a Taapsee or an Ayushmann, you know, Khurrana,
Who've had massive hits.
who had massive hits. I mean, you know, a John Abraham. I think all these guys, I think from where John started, you know, being this, you know, Terminator,
Yeah.
you know, to suddenly, you know, doing stuff like a Batla House and a Madras Cafe, a Parmanu. You know, he's really sort of, you know, built his own niche. So I have a lot of
That's
sort of
a
respect.
very interesting
Great
work,
stuff. Imran
yes.
Hashmi, you know, so I have a lot of respect for these sort of actors who sort of practice what they preach, right? They're genuinely looking to break the mold. They're genuinely looking to push the envelope and do stuff that is genuinely content driven, as opposed to merely saying something but doing something else, you know.
You know, I spoke earlier about our latest issue, which is, the most valuable celebrities in terms of the brands the celebrity brands they stand for, not what they endorse. What I'm talking about, the brands they are. What do you think makes for a real valuable celebrity? And I don't mean only by box office. What do you, from a producer and a creator's perspective, what do you look at as a
I
celebrity?
think for me, fundamentally, you know, when I think of an actor as a brand, you're right. Box office for me is still tertiary, believe it or fail.
Absolutely.
You know, I think for me, it's about the element of likability, just being endearing, and also standing for something, right? So, of course, we all have our bad days, we all have our good days, right? There are several actors who probably haven't had a great box office run in the last year or so, but that doesn't make them a lesser, but that doesn't make him or her a lesser brand for me, you know, because I know that within the audience, there is still a certain expectation from the actor. There is a certain sense of endearment for the actor, you know, and people are generally more forgiving, you know, towards actors like these who probably, you know, have their bad days because they've selected some wrong projects, you know. But I think largely, if I think the actor has a work ethic, he's professional. He works well with the crew. He works well with producers. I don't go by social media following. I don't go by box office. Those are still, you know, tertiary and you know, lesser criteria. But I think fundamentally, if you know there is likability, the actor stands for something unique. You know, his or her body of work has reflected some bold choices, some brave choices of films. You know, even maybe his off-screen image stands for something unique and distinctive. He or she is not doing what 20 others in the market are doing. Um, I think for me, you know, someone like that would really be my hero, you know, and he or she would be the sort of person that I would like to, you know, sort of work with. And I think that's pretty much reflective in some of the people we've worked with. Like, I think Imran Hashmi, for example, is a guy who's followed his own rules. He's followed his own norms, you know. He doesn't attend parties. He doesn't believe in doing the usual, you know, social media sort of, you know, drill that a lot of people think is the right thing to do these days. Or whether it's an Amir or a Vidya Balan, you know, or a Taapsee, Ayushmann. You know, these are all guys who've sort of made some bold moves in their lives, right? And of course, they've also gone down the tried and tested path, but everyone has a right to doing that, right? But I think which is why they've built more cred, you know, than a lot of the others, So yeah.
Yeah, so that's absolutely true because they've also done some varied kinds of work,
Absolutely.
which is many of which have actually worked.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's also come back a little bit, Tanuj, to your own career and how you perceive the world of entertainment. I mean, you started off, like I said, I mean, you some of the big companies, and then with this, how do you see the entertainment sector in India having changed? What are the key, for 2 or 3 changes you think have really made an impact as you turned producer yourself?
So I think for one, when I began in the business, I think we were an industry that was still very emotional. You know, we truly believed in the value of relationships. Things were driven by relations, by emotion, by a certain sense of rationale. I think there was more warmth, there was more joy in the business. I think we enjoyed the process because the process was less clinical. I think what's happened over the years, and maybe some of it is for the good. I mean, I wouldn't be cynical about everything that's changed, but I think over the years, as times changed, sort of more management companies got into the mix, a younger breed of actors took over. I think even when I speak to my friends who are, from the older lot, we all, unanimously, agree that I think the industry now has become a lot more transactional. And anyone who says otherwise is lying. I promise you that these are rampant conversations that we have in the industry all the time, that it's not what it used to be in the past, right? Having said that, it's not that it's become morose or depressing. It's still a lot of fun. I think what's gone up really is the amount of youngsters who are lean, mean, hungry, who want to be out there, prove themselves, who'll go that extra mile, who are a lot more professional, a lot of talent, a glut of talent. In fact, more talent, contrary to what a lot of people think, there's a bundle of talent out there, just waiting to get discovered, right? So I think that's the good part, right? I mean, you have new young filmmakers. I mean, we've worked with some exemplary young filmmakers, young advertising directors who want to sort of get their directorial debuts, young associate directors, young writers, young actors who all want to turn directors, producers. So I think there's a lot of hunger in the market, right? And everybody wants to go out there and prove themselves. People are exposed to content. They're coming up with some good scripts, some interesting ideas, new forms and formats of filmmaking, new technicalities, great technicians, educated, well-read, very aware of technology. So I think those have been some of the great plus points, of this transformation journey. But I think somewhere, my love and my heart and my relationships and my fondness is still for, those 7 or 8 or 9 actors at best, who I think haven't really sort of, lost their moral ground, who still have a spine, and who haven't changed, and who sort of share your vision or share your, sentiment for enjoying the process and the journey of filmmaking and not making it so clinical and so cut to cut and so transactional. So I mean, if there's something that I have to rue, I think it would just be this little paradigm shift in the way a lot of people now approach the process of filmmaking.
More clinical.
It's become more clinical for sure. But I think, like I said to you, I think as producers, we now have a lot more choices. There's a lot of young talent out there. It's waiting to get discovered, and I think that process for me is very joyous, because I think a producer's job primarily is to be a magnet for talent.
And also, I think the youngsters today are also the actors or the script writers. They're also exposed to streaming and global, content. So I think that also helps.
That's great, Saurabh.
Yeah.
But also, let me be honest, there's a lot of delusion. So there are a lot of people who wake up on the wrong side of the bed and think they can suddenly act because they have six-pack, or they think they can write because they now have Chat GPT, or people who come with a falsified sense of entitlement because they happen to be great connoisseurs of OTT and watch a lot of content and therefore believe that they can write,
do it,
and then a lot of writers who, without a shred of experience, who believe they can actually direct. Now I think it's great to dream, it's great to fantasize, but you have to be practical about the way because why is anyone going to put money on you, right? You need to have some body of work. You need to have earned your bread. You need to have at least assisted on a couple of projects. You need to have maybe done a few short ad films or some docus,
Some
something
body
to
of
sort of earn your bread. I think the big problem today is that whilst we have a lot of young, hungry talent, we also have a large bundle of delulus in our business, right? Who actually, just believe that they should be getting it, and things should fall into their laps. And I think I'm definitely one to show them the mirror, especially when they come to us, because I think that's important, because I think today's generation sort of doesn't realize the value of struggle. I think yesterday's generation, the yesteryears, still realize the power and the value and the need for struggle. I think
it's
today's kids
much
have it
more-
a lot easier.
And it's also much more organized. So
Yeah.
probably that struggle part is a little, there's still a struggle, I'm sure. But I'm saying that it's much more organized, more options, more structured. There is streaming to fall back on,
A lot
all
of
of that.
today's actors, directors, I mean, I'm not just going to, single out actors, but even directors, filmmakers, today there are way more options, right?
That's
There
exactly my
weren't
point.
enough options back then,
True.
right? So today, even if you don't have a film career, you don't have a flourishing film career, you make money by, attending events or, by being a brand
So it's a
ambassador.
whole ecosystem.
It's an entire ecosystem, social media collaborations. So in fact, there are a lot of, young actors and filmmakers who probably don't have enough film work,
But
but
massive
have
social
enough
media.
and more non-film work which is keeping them going. So films therefore for them then just become a vehicle to sort of propagate or further their non-film work. So even if they get that one project a year, it's good enough to keep them visible, for 4 more brands to approach them for
So is
something.
that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, I mean, like I said, I'm not being
Because
a
ultimately
Puritan.
it's not the art. It's the commerce which is taking over.
Well, like I said, I'm not being moralistic. I'm not being a Puritan. I think everyone should do everything. Everyone should earn however he or she wishes to earn. I think the more the merrier, the more the streams, the merrier. But the concern is if everything else becomes the mainstay, and what you're actually supposed to be in it for becomes subservient or secondary to, that's where the problem starts. I think fundamentally,
where is the core?
What's the core? You need to recognize your core. If your core isn't what it's meant to be, then you're not really, you're not true to your craft. You're just in it for the other reasons, which is fine. So long as you acknowledge that, so long as, you're respectful of that, so long as you're non-delusional about embracing that.
I mean, you spoke about ChatGPT. We'll come to that a little later. Before that, I wanted to ask you, there is also this view that some of these content companies, the bigger ones particularly, are looking at how to go global. In terms of getting, more and more global audiences to watch content, Indian content. And, it's an inward looking thing also that global content is coming to India. That is for sure. I mean, streaming has shown how much of global content we are actually consuming. But what about Indian content going global? What are your thoughts on that?
I think from a creative perspective, I don't think too many people in our industry really care about content going global. If I may be perfectly honest. Yes, of course, we'd like for our films to get monetized extensively. We'd like for our films to get released globally. We'd like for our films to release, in the Baltic countries and in China and in all these countries. And that's purely from a theatrical release or from a television release perspective. So the intent for our films to get wider and wider releases is intact, But that's not to say that anybody is really consciously designing films for an international audience, Truth be told, no matter what we say, we still only care about our numbers coming from India, and perhaps maybe the Middle East and UK, which are, the Middle East particularly now is one of the strongest international markets, for a Bollywood film. So I think today, we've been wired in a manner where if we get great numbers from India, we get a great digital sale, we get a great music sale, and maybe if the Middle East market does really well, we're all jumping with joy. And maybe perhaps rightfully so, because that is a chunk of our revenue. That is almost about 90% or 95% of your revenues. So I don't think people are really thinking about or caring about, oh, will my film be well received, in the Silicon Valley, or will my film be well received in Hong Kong or in Australia or in New Zealand? Yeah, if it is well received, great. Is that my focus?
That's not
No.
the aim.
Yeah, that's not my aim. My aim is to make sure it's a blockbuster in India. My aim is to make sure I get a great digital sale, and my aim is to make sure I get a great music sale. That is the focus. Good or bad, debatable, but at least we have our priorities clear.
Talking of China, you mentioned China. China, the number of screens and the number of screens in India, there's no comparison, right? In China is almost 10 times the number of screens we have in India. And then there is this whole debate about whether are there enough blockbusters to justify number of screens? Where do you see that, playing out? How are exhibitors, the big companies which are exhibitors, the multiplexes, what are their, how do you see their future?
Well, in India, the exhibition sector is pretty monopolistic in a sense, right? So, good or bad, again, debatable, but it's monopolistic. Now, when you speak to exhibitors offline, they complain about a bunch of things like, expensive land prices and about huge costs of infrastructure and, electricity and, sometimes films not working and therefore them not meeting overheads. I get it. But that's also what filmmakers go through, right? It's not like, we have a rosy journey all the time. We also run the risk of films not working, right? And at the end of the day, exhibitors also have revenue and significant revenues from several incremental revenue streams, right? None of which is shared with the producers, right? So it's not like we're partaking in advertising revenues in theaters, or we're partaking in popcorn, in revenues, or parking revenues, or, various other revenues, right? We're not partaking in any of that. We're not getting a share out of that, right? We're just getting a share out of bums on seats at the end of the day, right? So, so I think it's a bit of a symbiotic. It's a bit of a symbiotic relationship in that sense. But yes, I think I've always believed that demand has to be created. So even when I was living in London and working in the international markets, I consciously tried to open my movies out in more and more theaters across the United Kingdom, across the US, across the Middle East, because till you do not grow a market, till you do not consciously grow a market and take leaps of faith in sort of opening it out in theaters, maybe in the non-Indian pockets, or in theater that otherwise conventionally play Hollywood or international projects, you're never going to know. So someone's got to do the work, right? Someone's got to be out there and say, okay, you know what? Hey Cineworld, or hey View, or hey Odeon, or hey AMC, or hey whoever, will you work collaboratively with me in maybe trying out, these couple of cinemas? Let's figure out alternative terms for them, for example. If it works, great. Let's try it out over a couple of films. And if it doesn't work, okay, we go back to what we had earlier. And if it works,
a large market.
It's a large
domestic
market,
there's domestic market is always there.
It's always there. I think because we're such a big country, we're such a diverse country. If you give me the infrastructure, you create the demand, people are there. People are going to follow. We didn't have paddle, right? We've created paddle infrastructure. Everyone's suddenly behaving as if paddle's the new national sport of India, Mahjong was always around, but now Mahjong's the new buzzword, and suddenly everyone's like making money off Mahjong and attending. Indians are available, to trying out what you give them, but you have to give it to them, If you don't have the balls to give it to them, then, you're not going to get it.
True. The other point is, the elephant in the room, which we just mentioned earlier, is AI. There are enough and more content companies looking at creating entire films out of AI. Now, where do you stand in the AI debate, Tanuj? Are you a guy who says, okay, we can make a full film in AI for streaming or whatever? Or do you see AI as an enabler which can, of course, improve productivity dramatically in making a movie or making content? Where do you see it?
Unfortunately, I think I'm a bit old school, having been around for 22 years, and I'm still sort of grappling with, with the apparent onslaught of AI, in our business. I definitely think AI is an enabler. And I definitely think that AI can be used productively in certain aspects of post-production. Be it, AI-related dubbing, if you want to correct a dub, or, you want to create some stock footage, you want to have some transition shots which you haven't taken. I think AI is an enabler, at least from my perspective. I'm still going to wait and watch and see, if I can make an entire film, using AI. I just don't know if that experience would be joyous enough for me, or whether that would
Or will
be,
that have an emotional?
or will that have an emotional core, or would that be a personally rewarding experience, or also would I as an audience want to watch a movie that's entirely made on AI, knowing fully well that everything I'm seeing around or on screen is not real, and I personally wouldn't want to watch something like that. So therefore, would I want to make something like that? Maybe not. But then, maybe after a couple of years, when we're way more old and we have more white hair, and if that becomes the norm of the day, then maybe we'll all be victims to the norm, and when in Rome, do what the Romans do at that point of time. But as of now, I would just use AI as a smart enabling tool, but I wouldn't use it entirely. Yeah.
So much is happening, and we've just been through so much in terms of the journey the entertainment world in India has taken. Where do you see Indian entertainment, Indian movies in the next 2 or 3 years, maybe? Because the
See,
rate at which
yeah,
change is happening is dramatic.
dramatic. I've always believed that our industry may have its ups and downs, and we've in the last couple of years had more downs than ups, but we've also had a couple of ups, which have really worked. But I think the film industry, particularly, is here to stay. I think films will always remain the staple source of entertainment for the Indian audiences. You can have mahjong, you can have paddle, you can build parks, you can build bowling alleys, you can have gaming parlors. Nothing can and will ever beat the power, the aura, and the prestige of Bollywood. We are a star-struck country. We are a glamour-struck country. We enjoy our cinema. We worship cinema. We can all be cynical about it. We can all make Bollywood a convenient punching bag. We are soft targets because everyone has Wi-Fi connectivity and a mobile phone, and therefore can post opinions and troll. Irrelevant. The same people are eventually worshipping Bollywood. So we're here to stay. We're not going anywhere. And to everybody who sort of sounded the death knell of theaters, saying, oh, now OTT is like really, really strong, cinemas are going to die. I've got bad news. I think, some of the recent examples in the last couple of years have proven that there is an audience. The theatrical audience is alive. It exists. It's very much there. Yes, what has changed is that the audiences have become more selective. So there was a
But
time.
just to interject here, you spoke of Bollywood, but isn't it also true that there is great content coming from the South as well, and regional films? For instance, Malayalam movies, and you have some fantastic stuff. And so is it true? And this mainstreaming of the South in beyond just the South and coming into the national conversation, whether it is Pushpa, whether it is RRR, and a whole lot of other things, other titles. How? I mean, is that also going to sort of power
Yeah,
this
I
whole
think,
thing?
I have to admit that the guys in the South are definitely way more, the bigger risk takers than us.
True.
Hats
True.
off to them for that.
Absolutely.
They're definitely more adventurous than us. Um, I think they're definitely more progressive, in their sensibilities than us. Um, and I think the leaps of faith, their sense of discipline, and the levels of conviction in what they do is way stronger than us. So they score completely in all these departments vis-a-vis us. But I also want to, sort of, put a bit of a reality check there for every Pushpa and for every RRR that we hear about, in the media. There are also 10 flops in the South,
True.
that we don't know about or that we don't read about. So, when I read again, these so-called, false theme stories, about, oh, is there a South takeover? And of course, these are fantastic headlines, but they're rubbish. They mean nothing. And the general tip I would, give out to any reader who likes to consume entertainment content is do not believe a headline. Read the fine print or read what's deeper in, because headlines are misleading. There is no South takeover. There is no
You don't
South
believe
takeover.
that?
Absolutely not. There is no takeover. What South takeover are we talking about? I mean, they have a couple of big hit films. Great, we respect that. And like I said, they're definitely miles and leap years ahead of us, in a lot of aspects. But they have their own share of flops, and they have their own share of absolutely trashed movies as well, right? So I think we're all just a part of the same, ecosystem, So I don't think we're here to pip them or they're here to pip us. I think we're all pretty much coexisting, co-surviving, doing our own thing, So no one's taking over anything. OTT is not taking over the world. Theaters are here to stay. The South is going to continue doing what they're doing. We're going to continue doing what we're doing, So
And people are going to go and watch the movies
more selectively.
More selectively.
There was a
yes.
time when people would, you had that one first day first show audience एक ज़माने
yeah,
में.
yeah.
People would say, यार जो भी film आ रही है मैं देखूंगा इसे.
That is gone.
That is gone. I think now I think a good trailer or a good poster, or the promise of a good movie, word of mouth, have all become extremely important for people to decide whether they want to spend their $1,000 or $2,000 and going to theaters.
Or just stay home and watch.
Or just
the
stay
big
home,
one. Yeah.
So I think the selectiveness is definitely worrying, because for us as filmmakers, it puts us on our feet, because we're constantly having to make sure that what we're creating is clutter breaking enough to work theatrically. So that's a challenge for us, but it's also worrying for us in the same breath, right? But what we do know is if the film is accepted, if people like it, there's no stopping a good film. The theatrical audience exists. You cannot duplicate a cinematic experience.
So that is a great note on which to end this conversation, Tanuj. And great having you with us. And thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Look forward to having you again on a chat, maybe on a different angle to the world of entertainment. Thank you so much. Thank you.